Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm excited to be here with you guys today to talk about Venus retrograde, and it already began on July 22nd and it will continue until September 4th. It covers about 17 degrees of the sign of Leo, which will be about 40 days in total, or roughly 6 weeks. It happens every year and a half, year and a bit, about 18 months, and just over, I think, 19 months. And it's a part of a larger cycle called the synodic period, which is a term applied to many objects in the sky that simply means that there's a repetition or a pattern and a conjunction happens, a meeting. That's what synodic originally means, happens in a similar position every certain period of time. And so the Venus synodic period is almost 600 days. Basically what happens is there's a pentagram that is formed by the joining of Venus and the Sun in 5 different points on the astrological wheel. And so I just wanted to give you guys some food for thought. Venus retrograde synodic cycle on 2D appears like a rose, or it appears like a pentagram, the 5 different points. But when you apply it to the 3D reality that we exist in, and you consider time and depth, it's actually a fractal, which is much more beautiful of an image. So it still maintains the pentagram property, or the property of the rose or petal, rose petals, the 5 rose petals from Christian astrology. But it's actually, over time, this 8-year cycle moves forward in space. And so each time the conjunction of the Sun and Venus happen, its depth is a different position than it was before. So during these repeat cycles, there's a bit of a drift in the degrees, taking the meeting points back about 2.5 degrees, or just under 2.5 degrees. And so you have this corkscrew-like motion in space as the different conjunctions, both the direct motion, the superior conjunction, and the inferior conjunction, that is the retrograde motion, happen over time. I'll explain that all in a minute, but I just wanted to introduce this image that we're talking about a set of events in our solar system in which Venus and the Sun are joining optically in the same position. However, that position is actually shifting through space. It's a beautiful image that is wonderful for astrology and astronomy. So today I want to tell you guys about what real Venus retrograde represents. So we've already covered that it's a fractal. We know that it lasts 40 days, and we know it's a repeat pattern of 8-year cycles, synodic cycles, that sort of drifts back in the degrees of the zodiac. So from 10 degrees Leo to 8 degrees Leo, and so forth. It's just over 2 degrees. And so each time this conjunction happens, in the 2 different types of conjunctions that happen, they sort of shift backwards and move in space. So like I said, I'm not trying to contradict anyone. I'm trying to just bring information together in a comprehensive way. But basically, there is very different interpretations historically about what Venus retrograde means. So let's give a nod to the various different schools. So in ancient astrology, there was actually quite a lot of variance in interpretations that you guys are going to see in a minute about what Venus represents, or Venus retrograde represents. But a very common consensus was that they observed actually the speed of Venus as opposed to her directionality, the fact that she was going retrograde. Basically, the ancients really valued the speed of a planet, and when they saw Venus slow down as she approached her station period, that's July 22nd, they thought that that was an ill omen of bad things coming to pass, and that this was going to be a hindrance to their affairs or bad luck in relationships. In modern astrology, now, modern astrology is a problematic term because there's so many of us who are in modern astrology. Even ancient astrologers who incorporate Lilith points, the nodal points, the north and south node, or Uranus, Pluto, the outer planets, asteroids, they're not really ancient astrologers because ancient astrologers practiced observations with different data points. So there's a variety of modern astrologers who take on different flavors. So I'm not trying to exclude anybody's perspective, but I'm just trying to give you one. Many modern astrologers conceive of Venus retrograde as an introspection or self-awareness point for a certain period of time before it or a certain period of time after. It's the point in which we learn our life lessons and we come to terms with what happened in our relationships. It's a more psychoanalytic approach. And again, there's many different types of schools like evolutionary astrology that I find very inspiring that go deeper than that. But just for our purposes, modern astrology takes the observation of Venus retrograde out of omens, celestial omens, and towards more of a psychological analysis of what's going on inside of us. Now, social media astrology is a whole other animal, and I'm trying to be respectful because I actually like different people having different opinions and speaking their minds. I'm not here to censor anyone or tell them that it's not okay, just as long as it's genuine, right? That's my hookup. When you're when you're motivated by positive things, if you're imagining your own things and being authentic, I'm all for it. It's the fakery that sort of stresses me out. Anyway, in modern astrology, and this is a little joke, it's been reduced to some very fun observations, such as watch out, your ex is coming back. And I am definitely guilty of this. Years ago, I was saying this as well. Trying to explain astrology several years ago was so hard because the group, which means the collective, had a much lower understanding of astrology than they do now. So you could really easily overwhelm people. So we reduced Venus retrograde to X coming back, which is actually connected with ancient astrology observations. There's like omens about if your wife leaves and comes back during a Venus retrograde, you're good. But if Venus is retrograde, you're tough, out of luck. Basically, this is ancient astrology observations. And so the other observation that social media astrology sort of is selling right now is don't cut your hair, which again, I think is a pretty fair assessment. Don't get your Botox done. Don't do anything drastic in terms of aesthetic. Don't buy clothes right now because you're going to end up wanting to return them later. So a couple days ago, I posted a short form video, and it was the myth of the goddess, the birth of the goddess. And I thought it was great, but the algorithm didn't. And so it blocked it on a couple different platforms from being spread out. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but my videos are actually different between platforms. So I don't post the thing somewhere else that I do here as well. This is just my personal preference, and neither video did well. So first of all, if you don't mind checking it out and letting me know what you think in the comments or giving a like or dislike on it, then please go and do that. It's a nice video, but I'm going to tell you the myth here. So technically I'll go more into it now. And so essentially the idea is that 15,000 BCE, a star emerged over the horizon, and many temples and archaeological sites began being built in relation to this star position. And so in many different cultures. And so this was the star Sirius that emerged, Heliacal rising, over the horizon for the first time in thousands of years. And so this is pre-literate society, so oral histories. And so it had been below the horizon for thousands of years, and so ancient people may have been surprised by this. And it seems that they believed that this was the birth of a goddess. It wasn't Ishtar, it was not Venus, it was probably the prototype of these other goddesses. And so they also saw Venus in the sky, a planet, and they saw Venus emerge sometimes on the western horizon at sunset and sometimes on the eastern horizon at sunrise. And so they actually thought that all three positions were the same goddess. They didn't think it was a star. They didn't think that it was a planet. They thought it was the same goddess. And so they thought the goddess was visiting them, and so they had their own omens that are lost to history around that. But we can assume that some of these things, what some of those things were, based on the histories that we know that have been written down in about 3000 BCE and moving forward. So this is the prototype of our conceptualization of Venus and her going into the underworld, which is also a prototype for many of the myths associated with the underworld and hell. The other prototype obviously is the sun and moon, but for our purposes it's Venus. And so they thought this goddess had been birthed for the first time over the horizon. They built these temples. They revered her as the setting Venus, which is right after sunset. The one appears on the western horizon. That's the phase we were in just now. And in about couple weeks, we're going to start seeing Venus emerge on the eastern horizon at sunrise, and this is going to be called the morning star, which is the second phase of Venus. Now, I want to kind of clarify something because I know someone's going to point this out. At first, ancient people thought the 3 points, the two Venuses and the fixed star, were one entity, a god. They didn't attribute it to stars. And then over the millennia, they started attributing it to celestial transits, to bodies. And so they thought there was Venus. Venus was actually split into two identities, the evening star and the morning star. And so there was myth around that. And then in Hellenistic times, they actually combined. They realized that it was a planet that was emerging on two sides of the horizon, and so the myths evolved beside that. So quite an interesting image. And so concepts such as evil and good emerged at this time as well. One side was Venus of the heavens, Hesperus, the evening star, the phase we're ending, and the other side was the queen of the underworld, the morning star, Phosphorus, or as many people like to point out, Lucifer. So that's the phase we're entering. And even though you probably have your own assumptions based on the name Lucifer, that one is good and one is evil, it doesn't really work like that. So the morning star is actually not a bad phase for Venus if you have it in your chart, or don't worry about the next 9.5 months. It's going to be beautiful. And so the morning star is often depicted as a phase change. The evening star is the wandering star. It's the star of reminiscing and kind of the spiritual queen of the heavens, whereas the morning star is closely associated with chasing the sun. And so what happens in the morning, the phase we're entering, on August 17th, she will emerge, 2023. She will emerge first over the horizon, and the sun will rise up behind her. And when the sun rises up, of course, it will become much more bright, and so she is going to fade into the morning blue light or cerulean light and disappear. And so the myth goes, and especially in Christian astrology, the myth goes that she chases the sun and disappears or falls, and so therefore the story of Lucifer is attached to that. so chasing the sun and then falling away, not being able to make it. So let's talk about what Venus retrograde technically is. So we have the optics, we have the visual, we have the mythology in mind. So let's talk about what's technically going on, because I think there's some misunderstanding. So it's often represented that Venus is passing the sun and the earth, and that's why it appears as a conjunction, which is true for the zodiacal chart or the horoscope, because that point of view is from the earth. It's geocentric. But in reality, we know nothing revolves around us except the moon, our own emotions and thoughts, and we actually circle the sun. And because of this, it is actually the earth that is shifting at an angle that aligns in a syzygy the sun, the earth, and Venus. And from our perspective on the earth, it draws a straight line, and there's the conjunction, the observation of the conjunction. So it's not Venus moving past the sun, but it's rather the earth moving on its orbit, and from our perspective, the sun and Venus align. And so there are two positions in which Venus aligns with the sun. There's the interior-inferior conjunction. That's when optically it looks like a retrograde cycle. That's when it looks like on the horoscope it goes back in the chart. And so that is when Venus is closer to the earth, and that is when we get the morning star Venus. And then the second point is the superior conjunction, in which Venus appears to pass the sun, on the far end of the sun from the Earth's vantage point, and that's called the superior conjunction when Venus is direct. And so this also happens every period of time. So there's an interval period of 9.5 months between the 2 points. It goes back and forth between the two conjunctions, the inferior one on the near side of the sun, in which the aligns in the following way: the I keep on saying moon, the earth, the sun, Venus, and then the sun, and then the exterior one, in which is the earth, the sun, and then Venus. And so it goes back and forth between the two phases, and that's why Venus is rising up on the eastern and western horizon. And so there are some schools of astrology that consider that Venus retrograde is actually the better conjunction. It's considered the one that brings you some gifts and after a journey rewards you. I really like that perspective. And this is because from that perspective, from those astrologers' point of view, Venus is closer to the earth than it is in the superior conjunction when it is direct and creates a conjunction with the sun. Whatever conjunction is happening, it begins a synodic cycle. And so the synodic cycle is a period of time in which Venus forms one conjunction in one state, the morning star or the evening star, and then makes a complete round of conjunctions, the 5 different points on the pentagram, and then goes back to the same position. And that period is 8 years long. And so currently the synodic cycle, this repetition, is happening in 5 different signs. Now these signs overlap, so they begin in one sign and end in another, but I'll tell you the signs that the stationary period, the beginning of the retrograde, is. And so the 5 points on the pentagram, the 5 different positions in which Venus goes retrograde and conjoins the sun, are Capricorn, Leo, Aries, Scorpio, and Gemini. And through her retrograde period, beginning in those signs, in certain instances, she does actually retrograde back into the previous sign, but that's also changing with time. And this is the first instance in which Venus turns retrograde in Leo and will continue in Leo moving forward. And like we pointed out in the beginning, this is a fractal, which is moving forward in time and space. In fact, Venus has been retrograde in Leo since 1959. In 1959, the retrograde began in Virgo, and then the 17-degree retrograde happened, and then she ended up at 29 degrees Leo conjunct the fixed star Regulus, turned station, moved direct, and re-entered Virgo. So that was the first instance of her entry into Leo. So Regulus is a fixed star, and it is probably one of the most famous stars behind Sirius, and it's considered the star of kings. It's very auspicious, and so it is a very important star. Now, the thing to know about Regulus in this case is that it was in the sign of Leo until about 2011 in September, in which it shifted signs. So stars, even though they're called fixed, they also move in the sky. They just move very, very slowly for a couple different reasons, but let's not get into that now. There's a couple different shifts happening to stars that are causing them to shift for our perspective, but for our intents and purposes, let's just kind of consider that Regulus finally switched signs from Leo to Virgo in 2011. And so because of this, the conjunction of Regulus to the beginning of Venus retrograde happened for the last time in 2015, when there was the last conjunction of Venus and the Sun in Virgo. The retrograde period began in Virgo, the point of the pentagram that we're revisiting now, the same synodic cycle. And so that was the last time that Venus turned retrograde conjunct fixed star Regulus. However, this time it's about 2 degrees away, so it's not incorrect to say it's conjunct the fixed star. However, it is 2 degrees away, and it is out of sign, which means that Regulus is in Virgo and retrograde begins in Leo. And so most ancient astrologers would consider that in different parts of the chart, and they would not allow that kind of break between signs. But there is okay to sort of consider this differentiation. Just stay consistent with how you do astrology, and that will really help. So in 2023, Venus retrograde begins at 28 degrees of Leo. It is not conjunct Regulus, which is still at 0 degrees of Virgo. And just a quick observation to help you guys understand, you may hear something or see something about the fact that Venus retrograde happens in Leo over hundreds of years and kind of leaves Leo and then comes right back. And I think it's also important to point out that there are 5 different points to Venus retrograde that form the pentagram, and so each one is linked together through a synodic cycle. So this period from 1959 until now of Leo is different than the preceding period that was in Leo in the 19th century, 1812. That was a different point of the pentagram that is now, I believe, in Gemini or Cancer. So that has actually shifted, and so even though it is in Leo, again, it is actually a different synodic cycle, or it's a different point of the pentagram. And so Virgos, you're sort of off the hook with this one. Venus retrograde is not going to begin in Virgo until 2106. So now that Venus retrograde has finished, and it's been retrograding in Virgo since probably when most of us were born, so all of the 20th century, now we have Venus retrograde no longer in retrograde in Virgo until 2106. And again, it's going to be a different point on the pentagram. It's going to be a completely different position in space. But it doesn't matter, because we're going to be goners unless we become humans 2.0. So this time around, Venus retrograde began in Leo for the first time. So there was that shift from Virgo to Leo. And so there are 5 different points, and they're all at different positions of the zodiac. And so there will be a couple changes within the next 10 years that you may want to be aware of. One of the points will begin to transit in Libra in 2034, and another point will begin to transit in Pisces in 2033. So up until now, Pisces and Libra have been greatly untouched by the retrograde period during our lifetime. However, once that 2033, 2034 begins, they're going to be by degree every 8 years a part of the Venus retrograde cycle. Okay, so let's talk about the combustion of Venus, because that's very important. I don't watch a lot of this stuff, but what I have seen, I haven't heard anyone talk about it. And it's important because it coincides with some transits that we'll talk about in a minute. But the period of August 8th through the 13th is a critical period for Venus. This is when Venus becomes combust with the sun. And I take a bit of a issue with combustion, not because I disagree with it, but because I find it quite inconsistent in people's practice of astrology, which means that in certain circumstances they consider it apply, but in other considerations they ignore it. And so it seems pretty inconsistent how people use combustion. Combustion essentially means that a planet or a transiting body is burned up by the rays of the sun. So think of the sun as a steamroller and essentially flattening or completely wiping out the planets that it approaches. And the heart of the sun, when the conjunction happens within a degree, within 17 minutes, there's various different observances. That is like a bullseye. And so as a planet approaches the bullseye point, it becomes combust. So it disappears and then finally reappears when it forms the perfect conjunction. And so that bullseye is considered extremely important, and the combustion is considered sometimes a detrimental moment. And in Venus retrograde, it's really important because during that time, that is when Venus goes below the horizon from one phase and starts changing into the other phase. So from August 8th through the 13th, Venus as the evening star is going to disappear below the horizon, and we're no longer going to see her until August 17th when she reemerges as the morning star. So let me go over the details of this. On the 8th, Venus goes below the horizon. She will no longer have a heliacal rising on the western side in the evening, and then she's going to form a conjunction with the sun on August 13th, and then she's going to emerge again on August 17th on the eastern horizon at sunrise, and that is the transition of Venus, and she'll become the morning star. Okay, so there are 3 different events that happen that may confuse you this year alongside the heliacal rising of Venus, the morning star. So I'm going to just go over this in a top level explanation, and if you guys want to know more in depth, then please do so. I've talked about this a lot in the past, but I don't mind going into this in a deep dive again. So there are 3 events through the summer that happen each year that are often mixed up together, interchanged together, and I've even been guilty of misrepresenting them in the past. So I just want to clarify this here and now. There's a conjunction between Sirius, the fixed star that is the birthplace of the goddess or Venus, and that between the fixed star Sirius and the sun, and this conjunction happens on July 7th. Sirius is not visible then, and it is below the horizon, and it is a very sacred time because of this perfect alignment between our star and Sirius. Now, there is a second event in which the fixed star Sirius emerges from behind the sun's rays, and that is called the heliacal rising of Sirius. And so this is actually different based on the latitude that you live at. So the latitudes closer to the equator see this event first, and then the ones that are more north of that see the Heliacal rising the first time that Sirius emerges after being conjunct the Sun. You actually see that more into August. And this coincides with the third event, which is Lionsgate, and that is not so much an astrological event as it is a numerological attribution. There is some astrological metaphors or connections or mythology around it, but it's really focused on the number 88, August being the 8th month and it happening on the 8th day. So it's possible that for some of you, depending on your latitude, the emergence of Sirius and Lionsgate may actually happen at the same time, but they're not actually interrelated. I would say Lionsgate is a New Age mythology. The Heliacal rising of Sirius is connected to the Nile flooding, the Egyptian and Sumerian myths, and the conjunction with the Sun is very important throughout history as well. Now this year, the confusing part is that Venus is also going to emerge in August. And so on August 17th, after she transforms from the evening star to the morning star, Venus will emerge on the eastern horizon as Phosphorus or Lucifer, the morning star. And so the conjunction of the Sun and Venus when Venus is retrograde happens every 8 years in Leo. This is called the Synodic Cycle. And so 8 years ago was 2015, in which Venus and the Sun joined in Leo 2 degrees higher up, so about 23 degrees Leo. And so for a while now, during these conjunctions, several decades back, the conjunction of Venus and the Sun happened around the same time as the Heliacal rising of Sirius star and as Lionsgate. It is a good idea to look back to 2015 to see what has happened in this time frame. Something would have completed, a whole pattern would have happened in that time, something began and ended possibly, or major themes in your life emerged. And so with the conjunction of the Sun and Venus this year, we are beginning a new cycle for this data point, for this one point of the pentagram. Now the interesting thing about 2015 is that we had the conjunction of Venus and the Sun in Leo. However, we had another astrological pattern that has emerged again in 2023. In 2015, Pluto in Capricorn at about 14 degrees was squaring the North Node in Libra. And so if you know already, then Pluto is currently squaring the North Node in Aries. So the North Node moves much faster than Pluto, and so the North Node was able to transit that whole space of time. And so now the Pluto is joining the North Node where the South Node was, and now before it was joining the North Node where the South Node is now. So it's a pretty strong T-square. And again, I want to get into this in a dedicated video for Pluto squaring the nodes, but the specific date on which this happens is August 3rd. It's important to consider that Pluto has been squaring the nodes for a few months now, but just see the pattern and the repetition. First, it was on a T-square to the nodes in 2015 when the last time Venus joined the Sun in Leo while Venus was retrograde, and now it's joining on the other side of the axis, and the North Node has completely turned around and we have a reversal. So it's interesting, and it's a very specific amount of time that you may want to consider in terms of the things that have been happening. However, I think it's very important to consider another date for your reflection. So in 2015, something may have begun for you, a new pattern or a new cycle. I would say that by August 2019, that cycle would have reached its peak in some way. Something was happening in your life that was at a crescendo, the maximum energy there. And so on August 15th, in the middle of August in 2019, those events that began in 2015 may have become the most complicated. And since then, there's been a decompression in your life of whatever themes and events concerning especially relationships and dynamics with other people. And so when Venus joins the Sun on August 8th, it will have been a complete cycle from 2015 to now, with the high point in 2019. I just want to highlight, and this will make sense at the end of the video, that the conjunction of Venus and the Sun when Venus was direct in 2019 happened at 20 degrees of Leo. So this is all happening between 19 to 23 degrees of Leo. So if you have placements in those positions, that's super important for you. Or if you have placements in those degrees 19 to 23 of Aquarius, that's super important for you. Or if you have Scorpio or Taurus placements in those degrees, that's also very important for you. And we'll talk about this in a dedicated video for the individual zodiac sign that you should watch for your sun, moon, and rising. So this applies to all of you who have significant positions in those placements. So I would just say the way to think about it is something began in 2015, and it's something that could be a carryover from previous events, but something definitely began and grew, and now something is decompressing between the period of 2019 August and now, and it would have probably been the most intense in about 2019. So as you guys can see, this is very difficult to explain succinctly, but I'm trying to kind of put it all together for you the best I can. I am glossing over some of the other transits. I'm just trying to explain like the bare bones and the important things. And so I pulled 3 dates that I think are very important for Venus retrograde this time around, in which I think observably things will happen the most for people. And so this doesn't mean that events won't happen at other points. Specifically, watch the moon in relation to Venus retrograde this time. I think it's going to be an indicator of our feelings that feel strong or feel down some days. So watch the moon in relation to Venus retrograde. But tomorrow, or the day that you're watching this, I'm filming on the day before, there's going to be a conjunction on July 27th between Venus and Mercury. And so what's important about that is that Mercury is about to have a retrograde period on August 22nd through September 15th. And so Venus retrograde joining Mercury in some way initiates communication that will probably unravel through the end of Mercury retrograde period. So there should be some event, especially around relationships, in which some important communication is being said. This is a really good time to initiate communication about stressful matters that are not progressing, but you have to be brave to see what the outcome of that will be. And then you'll see matters addressed or become more complicated as Venus descends into the underworld on August 8th through the 13th. However, on August 13th, there should be some kind of a spark or recognition improvement. And by the 17th, as Venus emerges into the morning star, you'll be much ready to move forward with whatever information or communication was exchanged. Then when Mercury turns retrograde on August 22nd, those really pesky communication issues with loved ones or important people can really get addressed. So you have to be bold. You have to really be willing to accept the outcomes, whatever they may be. But if you're stuck in a situation in which communication is the problem, having a conversation on July 27th or thereabout before August 8th may be very helpful to resolve your circumstances. So have those conversations and then be patient for the outcome. Of course, don't use harsh language, don't use criticism, because that can too backfire, and I'll talk about why next. But I think this is a really good time to try to resolve things, especially if it's in that larger pattern of 2015, 2019, if this is a theme in your life, or if you're ready to move forward. And I'll explain who will be moving forward and what each of you need next. And then on August 8th, this is when Venus goes into the underworld. We have the conjunction that I'm somewhat worried about, and it's the conjunction of Venus and Lilith. So Lilith has been in Leo, and we've seen narcissism everywhere. Like, have you not seen it since the spring, since she entered? I have good news, because Lilith is going to move into Virgo in October, so we're almost through it already. But Venus will join Lilith, and it's likely, because of the combination of events, because Venus goes below the horizon, which is historically connected with a bad omen, the 8th through the 13th, before she joins the sun, the combustion below the horizon, not being able to be seen. And because she's joining Lilith, the troublemaker, the frenemy that throws a wrench into your situation to break it up or to cause conflict. Be careful of those dates, the 8th through the 13th. If you have a situation that you're dealing with in which there's frustration, contention, conflicts of interest, really lay off those situations and be careful who and what you're dealing with through those days. If something goes wrong by August 13th, something should improve. And in fact, if you're not the troublemaker party, if you're minding your business and some Lilith, someone is trying to cause you strife, it's likely going to backfire for them by the 13th of August, when the sun joins Lilith and Venus and clarifies everything. So if you have been slandered, if you've been defamed, if something bad happens on August 13th, whatever thing that's out of your control in which injustice happened, it is likely that the sun transiting Lilith and then Venus, or Venus and then Lilith, will cause clarification of the matter. And so you'll see an upturn. And the real improvement in energy is on the 17th, when Venus emerges as the morning star and is reset. So you're looking at the time period of the 8th through the 17th for this whole transformation, the epicenter being August 13th. So there are some of you who are actually affected more by this than others. And there's two groups of you, and I'll probably put up a table that you can reference. But essentially, some of you that are born at specific times, this specific retrograde point, the 5 different positions of Venus retrograde, the 5 points of the star, the 5 points of the petals of the rose, you align with this current point. And so for you, this is more deep, more emblematic. So if you find yourself, your birthday falls within those dates and it has to be specific, this event coincides with your chart. Now, group A represents Venus in a specific position in the sky. And for you, this Venus retrograde conjunction, inferior conjunction, represents, leading up to August 13th, a heavy decompression and realization. Most of you who have this placement of Venus in some way are reflective anyway, but this is a time in which you will want to shelter, in which you will want to think, in which you will want to assess. Nothing may be changing. In fact, a lot may have changed for you already leading up till this time, but until August 13th specifically, you're really internalizing heavily the last almost 600 days. Now, group B is the second Venus, and it has to be within range of the dates I provide. And so for you, you're probably in an energetic low more so than anybody else. This is cyclical and we all go through it, but it's just your turn to experience the low. So if you're feeling low emotionally, energetically, this is the phase that you're in now. But the silver lining, or the star in the sky, the hopeful moment, is August 13th, in which you are going to have your big rebirth. So actually this Venus retrograde is the most powerful for you because you are in perfect alignment with what's happening. And so this speaks to your experience in the area of the sky that's most relevant to you. And so you are beginning your own personal synodic cycle for the next 8 years. So this is very important. And I would recommend you learn as much as you can about Venus at this time and how it pertains to your chart. I want to talk to you guys about the difference between the morning star and the evening star. So we all have a phase of Venus retrograde in our own chart. And so for some of us, we were born when Venus was rising in the western horizon, the evening star Hesperus. And some of us were born when Venus was rising as Phosphorus or Lucifer in the morning star. And so this is very important to understand how that pertains to you. And again, we can go into this much deeper at a different time, but I want to show you guys how to figure out in your chart if you are a morning star or an evening star. So I have 2 ways to really do this. I'm giving you 2 ways just for clarity. So if you don't understand one, then hopefully you'll understand the other. If we look at the zodiac from Aries to Pisces in that direction, if Venus is positioned higher in that zodiac, so more towards Pisces than the sun is in your chart, your Venus is ahead of the sun, and therefore she is the evening star or Hesperus. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. So just take out your chart and find out if you are the evening star Hesperus ruled Venus. Now, if you look from Aries to Pisces and you see Venus closer to Aries than the sun in your chart, so she's in a zodiac sign that's closer to Aries, then you are the morning star, Phosphorus or Lucifer. Hey girl, hey. And you are in that phase of Venus. This is the phase that's beginning now. So you are aligned to that phase, even if you're not in the dates I had just given. Okay, so here's my second method, just in case the zodiacal method doesn't make sense to you. So if you have a day chart, which means that the sun is between the 1st and the 7th house, more specifically the 8th through the 11th house. I'm going to break it down a little bit further for you. So if your sun is in the upper area of your chart and Venus is on the left side of your sun, then she's the evening star. So write that down. That's the phase that we're ending. And if she's on the right hand side of the sun, then you are the morning star. And this is specifically if your sun is positioned between the 8th and the 11th house. If Venus is on the left-hand side, it's the evening star, Hesperus. And if it's on the right-hand side, it's Lucifer. Now, if you have the night chart, which means that the sun is in the lower part of the chart, so below the horizon, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th house or so, depending on the house system you're using, especially between the 2nd and the 5th house. I'll explain the houses on the ascendant in a minute. So if you have a night chart and Venus is on the right hand of the chart, so it's right of your sun, then you have a Hesperus Venus, an evening star. And if it's on the left hand side of the sun, 1st, 2nd house or so, then you have the morning star, Lucifer. Now, for those of you who have the sun, especially like in the 12th house and the 1st house, and it's like, what's left or what's right. Let's take a look at your chart separately. So if your sun is on the right-hand side, close to the descendant in the 7th or the 6th house, if Venus is above your sun in the chart, then that means you are a Hesperus Venus, the evening star. And if Venus is below your sun in that chart, then you are a Lucifer Venus. Now, conversely, if you're on the left-hand side of the chart, if your sun is close to the ascendant in the 12th or the 1st house, if Venus is above your sun in that area of the chart, then it's the Lucifer Venus, hey girl, hey, morning star, the phase that's starting. And if Venus is below the sun in those houses, the 12th or the 1st house, then we're talking about the evening star, the phase that's ending, Hesperus Venus. So hopefully between these two methods, now you've learned which one is which and at least which phase you were born in. Now let's talk about what that represents and also what it represents in relation to this transit of Venus. So let's start with Lucifer, hey girl, hey, morning star Venus. So this is when Venus, I'm repeating for people who are new so everybody can follow along. So this is the morning star Venus. This is the one that rises over the horizon before the sun in the morning and disappears as the sun rises. And so we'll get into this deeper on another video, but this is the energetic Venus. And this is the one that is quick to move towards things and then slow to let go. So you quick to move, slow to let go. It's associated with Lucifer, but it doesn't mean that you're Luciferian or something evil. That's an attribution, I think it's from the Bible. And in the Bible, there's a description of Venus chasing the sun. And so essentially what happens is that it is a representation or a poetic device to represent Lucifer chasing God and falling flat. But that's not necessarily what this represents. In fact, the morning star is the energetic, upbeat, adventuresome Venus. Okay, so for our purposes, that's all we need to know today. And so this phase of Venus coincides with the current phase that's beginning now. So you may have, over the last 9.5 months, felt unlike yourself. We all go through this cycle of on and off switch. And so your switch is about to be turned on and things will pick up for you for the next 9.5 months. Now, conversely, if you were in the evening star group, this is the star that rises after sunset or appears after sunset and sets after the sun. And this is the beautiful goddess of the sky. And so this is the phase of Venus that we are ending. If you belong to this category, this is the phase that's ending, and you are typically slow to initiate things. You're very pensive as a person, and you are quick to let go when a situation has reached its end. And the current phase is an inversion of your placement, so the opposite thing is happening. And so you've had a pretty busy 9.5 months. And so now it's time to let go, allow the other side to initiate, and wait for your turn in 9.5 months. So this puts the pressure off of you and life events. And probably you've done a lot of inner work, inner soul searching in the last 9.5 months. So the intensity of those feelings and thoughts will also decompress. And you will end up being put much more in the moment and also having new experiences, which is sort of opposite to what you naturally do. But we all, like I said, have our on and off switch. Okay, so only 2 more things that I want to say that will help you understand and position yourself in this Venus retrograde. I want to show you guys some dates in which I would say are recovery dates. This doesn't mean something horrible will happen, but it is probably true that many of us are going to be doing some degree of soul searching through the next 40 days or 37 days now. So if you're dealing with heavy emotional issues, and especially with things to do with your self-esteem and identity. So if you have low self-esteem, or if someone is challenging your self-esteem or being harsh or critical of you, there's some moments in which this improves. Specifically August 14th and September 23rd. There's some really favorable angles between Venus and Chiron that are going to help you heal anything that you don't feel strong about and anything that you feel demoralized about, especially. There's another favorable angle in 2024 on January 11th. So the dates that will really help any issues to do with self-esteem that come up, the dates that really help it are August 14th, September 23rd, January 11th. You will see different opportunities during those dates to elevate and to heal whatever has come up. And then we have Venus in the North Node, and we have some favorable dates for that. And this is really important for those of you who are dealing with hope and dealing with direction in life. If you feel as though your direction in life is difficult to identify, or if you've been dissuaded from where you are going, these dates are going to help you. And specifically if things emerge during this Venus retrograde that are bringing up those issues for you. So if this Venus retrograde, July 22nd through September 4th, brings up issues to do with direction in life and figuring out how to sort things out, the following dates are going to be very helpful for you in terms of seeing the path through. So you may want to wait until that time before you start worrying about things working out. If you are left confused after this Venus retrograde for whatever reason, you may want to wait for those dates in order to find some understanding or some solution to whatever this Venus retrograde raised for you. So the first date is this year on October 3rd, so it's not long that you have to wait for that. And the second date is on January 19th, 2024, so also not too long after that. That's when Venus forms favorable aspects to the North Node and whatever has been raised up by this Venus retrograde, in which you feel that your perspective about where to go has been confused or obstructed in some way. That is when it is likely that some answers will emerge. For some of you, it's going to happen sooner, but I want to give you guys an end date by which I think things will figure themselves out. And so the third set of dates, or actually 3 different dates doing 3 different things, will address other favorable aspects that I think you can look forward to. So this Venus retrograde is under a square to Jupiter in Taurus that Venus rules. This is going to be complications for some of you in terms of luck, like things not going your way or things that are hard to find luck in. If something comes up that's unlucky, or if something doesn't work out in the way that you want, wait until October 22nd of this year for a solution to emerge. So be patient, it is coming. The second favorable aspect is October 31st, and that is a positive aspect between Venus and Uranus. And under this aspect, again, Uranus is in Venus's home sign of Taurus. And by October 31st, if something unexpected emerges with Venus retrograde and messes stuff up, if chaos emerges in a relationship or circumstance for you, by August 31st, you may be seeing a resolution, or you might be surprised that that was some ingenious resolution to a problem that you've been dealing with already. The last favorable aspect I want to highlight, and there's way more, I'll be telling you guys about this in other videos, is a favorable transit between Venus and Pluto on November 6th. And remember, earlier on today, I told you that Pluto is squaring the nodes of fate in the same way, inverse to the way it squared the nodes of fate in 2015. So this is a synodic cycle, large full completion cycle event. And so if something comes up for you in terms of power inequalities or injustice, by November 6th, it is likely, especially if you're not in the wrong, if you're innocent, or if something has become messed up in terms of power in your life, by November 6th, there should be an emergence or an improvement. So especially if something wrong happens, then by November 6th, there's a resolution to it or a solution that emerges. That includes if someone's abusing power in relation to you. I would not mess around with Venus retrograde, especially this year, any year, on that level, in terms of being mean to people. Or I don't do that, but if I were to be aggressive, this is a backfire. This is an event that leads to backfiring or bad consequences for bad behavior sooner or later. So if you've experienced injustice, somebody's abusing power in relation to you, I would expect that to resolve by November 6th, and a big event on November 6th that would be in your favor. There's one more event that I want to highlight, and that's an eclipse, and it's moving forward. So if you want to understand where we are going, hopefully this will give you some perspective. So I don't know if you remember, I've given you a lot of information. However, Venus retrograde has happened in Leo between 18 and 23 degrees. All of these different points are in Leo in those degrees. And remember, this affects all the fixed signs, especially Aquarius, but also Scorpio and Taurus. And so this specific area is where the Venus retrograde happened in 2015. Now we have a following cycle in our fractal corkscrew of energy. And then in 2026, which is a couple years from now, we are going to experience a total solar eclipse in this exact position. So if really big events come up in your life right now alongside this Venus retrograde, or if something began in 2015, continued in 2019, and keeps on happening, then it's likely that by 2026, you are going to get some big outcome for those events. And I am leaning towards a positive one. Now, this is a new moon solar eclipse, and so that will initiate a way forward. So if you are really struggling trying to finish school, working your way through a relationship, or anything that can be long-winded, I would give myself the timeline of now until August 12th, 2026 for a bigger cycle completion. You can hear the sounds like Vancouver, but it's not. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed my video. It's a different way that I did it today, but I hope you like it. I think it's going to be very long, but I hope it was informative and it helped. Make sure to like and share, comment if you choose to do so. And thank you for watching, and thank you for being members. Have a happy Venus retrograde. I hope I've demystified it for you.